the only show focused on stars' improvement strategies and the leaders who implement them. This is the Rising Stars with Rex Wallace Show, brought to you by Hyperlift.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Rising Stars with Rex Wallace. As you can tell, I am not Rex Wallace. I definitely not. I have a little bit more hair and I have an accent as well. My name is Luis Cerda, and I work as a star ratings consultant here at Rex Wallace Consulting. Today, we're going to talk about the Spanish-speaking population in the different areas of the United States and a couple of topics that we want to address. Specifically, what are the challenges that this population is facing to obtain care? What can be done to address the needs of this population? And what is the current and the future impact of the Spanish-speaking population to the STARS rating? To help me lead the conversation today, we have Dr. Moraima Rios, who is the Medicare STARS Program Director at Medical Card System or MCS Healthcare with headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and Mr. Mark Ureste, who is the Vice President of Business Development at CareNet Healthcare Services with headquarters in San Antonio, Texas. Let's start by having both of them introduce themselves to the audience. So please let us know what is your respective position at your companies. Give us some background on the services that you provide. Where's your background and why is this topic important to you? So as always, ladies first. So Moraima, shall we start with you?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Moraima Rios, as we said. I work at Medical Card System. I work as a Medicare STARS Ratings Director. Basically, we do everything related to STARS Ratings. We are the company that we have, well, a health insurance company. We have around over 200,000 members that are trusting their lives to us. So what we do here is we try to provide the best healthcare that's available to our members. What I've been doing for the past 5 years, it's making sure we comply with our team. It's making sure we comply with the STARS regulations and that we work together as a company to attain the best STARS possible, so our members can feel and enjoy the best and have the best quality of life that's out there possible for them.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Oreste. I'm Vice President of Business Development at CareNet Health, and thanks for having me, Luis. I'm originally from South Texas, and I grew up with a grandmother who could not speak English, right? And so this is kind of a near and dear to me. At CareNet Health, we have interactions with about 50 million Americans every year. 1 out of 3 Americans have access to our services, so we have conversations with individuals every day, and one of the things that we do is that we help Medicare Advantage plans maximize their potential from a star ratings perspective and activating members so that they're closing gaps in care. We work with about 10 million Medicare Advantage members with our health plan partners. And since the inception, right, we've always maintained a place where we've had bilingual staff. We're located in San Antonio, Texas, which is highly bilingual, and so something that we've been working on for quite a bit, and is part of the mission of our organization is to help this population.
Thank you very much. And this is very interesting because as the audience can see here, the three of us are Spanish speakers. I'm also from Puerto Rico. I have been working with STARS for the past 10 years. And talking about that, Mark, I wanted to turn this back to you because I remember when we started having this conversation, we said that we wanted to talk about specifically the barriers to access to care that the Hispanic or the Latino population may face. And at that time, you made a wonderful point on why we should not be using the term Hispanic or Latino and why we wanted to better use the term Spanish-speaking population. So I really wanted to start with that. So would you mind sharing with the audience what are your thoughts on the use of the word Hispanic or Latino population for the topic that we're discussing today?
Yeah, sure. And I think that it's one of the things that I over the last 4 or 5 years have learned, especially right as kind of the population, the Hispanic population or the Spanish-speaking population in the U.S. has changed, and even the membership population has changed, is that that's a pretty diverse group. And when you look at individuals that are originally from Puerto Rico versus Mexico or Central America, not every one of those groups identifies with the the same labels that we use in the United States, or that identify as Spanish speakers or Hispanic. In some cases, the constructs that we use around, many things are different. Language is different. One of the things that we talked about and we played a little bit with is that, you look at different populations like the British population and the American population, even though we're all English speaking individuals, we are very different, right? So there are a lot of things behind that, and so I don't necessarily know if there is an issue or not an issue with using any of those labels or any of that nomenclature. I'm always more interested into, how do people identify themselves, right? And where do they come from, and what are they feeling? And using some of those terms are pretty broad, and I don't necessarily always help us in achieving the goal, which is making sure that everyone has an equal swing at the bat at better health.
Yeah, thank you. Morama, do you have any reaction to what Mark was just saying?
No, I kind of agree with him. Here in Puerto Rico, things are a little bit different because we're in an island, so everyone speak the same type of Spanish. We don't have the barriers. Obviously, we do have some immigration in the island from the Dominican Republic and other areas, but they get used to what we do, or we make them get used to what we do. By the time they're here and they get Medicare services, which is what we provide, they already are within our system and working with us. But I do understand that when it comes to the states, there are different barriers that we have to tackle in different ways that we do in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, I'm from Puerto Rico as well, but I've been living in Orlando, Florida for the past 4 years. And as a joke, people say that Orlando is municipality number 79 of Puerto Rico. This is like just another town of Puerto Rico. But by after living here for 4 years, I have noticed that exactly what you mentioned, Mark. There is a lot of different, I'm gonna say nationalities, Spanish speaking, Hispanic, Latino nationalities here, and yes, all of them are different. Yeah, we speak the same Spanish, but at the same time we use different words, and the things that define our culture, the things that define who we are basically different. For example, Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Dominicans are very alike because these are three islands in the Caribbean. But when you go down to South Florida in Miami, it's mostly a Cuban population, and you can see that the things that they do are fundamentally different. Like, for example, all the things that you see Puerto Ricans doing here in Orlando. And I believe that at the same time, that is also reflected in how people approach healthcare, how people understand the needs that they may have, and that affects their health overall. So that being said, I wanted to start by asking, and I will start with you, Mark, again. What do you think at this point are the major barriers to care for the Spanish speaking population in the service area that you work with?
Right. And again, I'm just going to kind of go back to what you were talking about and expand a little bit more in my remarks, and that is, when you look at barriers to care, right? We look at many things. Language fluency is one. Um, but even within language fluency, right? If you look and you kind of go and start looking at the different populations and how people identify and what their backgrounds are. Even then, if you look at kind of like how important is language fluency in addressing the care gap or delivering the message, you break it down even further. We find, like, in Central Americans, for example, if you're from Central America, the chances that you speak Spanish in your home are about 80%. If you're from Puerto Rico, the chances that you speak Spanish in your home, and I'm talking about U.S. residents that are members of Medicare Advantage, are about 30 points less. Meaning, so it's just as important for me to understand, not only, are you a Spanish speaker or do you come from a Spanish speaking background, but also things like nationality, kind of culture, and also things around assimilation. How assimilated are you to the culture? Meaning, are you a first generation immigrant? Are you a second generation immigrant? There are a lot of those types of factors, right? And it's probably way too many to blow up in 30 minutes. But language fluency is where we start, and then we start kind of going and looking at the individual and start dissecting some of those other things that we were talking about, with the flavor of, we still have that Spanish speaking need to address. And that's always at the core of what we do, is trying to make that message more personal to the individual.
Mhm. Um, when you mentioned that, I have this image in my mind. You guys probably have seen it as well in the movies, in the telenovelas or something. This image of the old grandmother or grandparent or granddad going to the doctor with their grandson, and that kid being the one translating for them because they don't speak English, but they need still to go to the doctor. And you have this person, usually, like I said, a minor, translating for them. Now, I would expect, like nowadays, places like maybe Texas, California, Florida, New York, we will not have those issues. Like you should find plenty of doctors who can speak Spanish and provide care to speaking Spanish population with no issues. But I'm thinking about places where we see more people moving to nowadays, maybe like Kansas, Washington State, those places up in the north. And I wonder, Mark, do you happen to work, you know, at any of those places? Do you happen to provide service at any of those places, or do you know about how the language barrier is being addressed at those places? What do you think the helplines could be doing to prepare to provide those services to these ever-growing populations who are moving to these states now?
Right. For us, probably, when you, when we boil it down, right, to its most basic level, clinicians are extremely important, right? And the education that they provide and the guidance that they provide is extremely important. One of the things, that you're talking about is the ability for clinicians, for those messages to be delivered in Spanish. What we see, first of all, is we are able to provide most of our services via voice or via the telephone or via digital interactions, and we do quite a bit of work for plans for populations that are in historically kind of non-Spanish speaking areas of the U.S. So kind of those types of areas that you were talking about. We have always made an effort to have a bilingual staff as much as we can. But I mean, it's no new news, right? That depending upon the skill set, whether it's a registered nurse or a physician, right, the ability to staff a Spanish speaking care coordinator is easier than to staff a Spanish speaking registered nurse. So having a partner like CareNet One gives you the ability to go and do some outreach and to hire and to staff with Spanish-speaking clinicians, and to be able to cast that net throughout the entire United States and take advantage of clinicians that can work remotely in places like Orlando or things of that nature, right? That can deliver services in other places. So by just kind of the way that we staff, we address some of that. The other thing that we're seeing more and more is we're seeing more and more clinics whose focus are on Spanish speaking individuals. So if you look within the Medicare Advantage world and you look at, in some plans have developed partnerships with clinics, I'm thinking of clinics like Suvida or others that have that whose sole purpose is to help deliver care to Spanish speaking individuals in Spanish, in a way that they are more able to understand and to act on what it is that they need to do to close care gaps.
I think that's a great point that you're bringing up because in Puerto Rico, we don't have the issue of people don't speak Spanish or the doctors don't speak Spanish. Healthcare providers speak Spanish in Puerto Rico, it's our main language. But we do have the issue of health literacy. You go to the doctor explain you something. Do you really understand what the doctor is telling you? And that's where it gets complicated because a lot of times people don't really understand everything that's going on with them. So they can't make the best decision because they don't understand it. So for us, it's working really hard with our physicians to make sure they communicate well with their members so they can understand and they can take like positive action towards their life and get more empowerment. And that's where you can see a change. I think as the population keeps changing, baby boomers are already Medicare Advantage beneficiaries and they're highly educated, so they know a little bit more. And we are seeing the difference here with our members are more able to question things. They're more up to date with their benefits. They want to know more things. They don't believe you because you said so. They want to understand it. And I think that's a barrier that we need to overcome either here on the states It's not just let them understand the language, just let them understand what we're talking about so they can make
Mhm.
their own decisions.
And
Yeah.
Moraima makes a great point, and Luis, you brought this up earlier, right? Is that the, it's one thing to be able to communicate, right? But then there's the whole process by which, and you brought this up, but I remember directly having to go in going to a physician's office with my grandmother or with my mom, and having to translate for the physician. Well, my Spanish is really great, and colchas will always be colchas. I'll never call them blankets. But when you start talking about diabetes, my Spanish quickly drops off, right? So that
Mhm.
we at CareNet, one of the things that we did was is that we instead of using a translation service, for example, as a standard translation service for Spanish speaking individuals, we went out and trained internal folks, right, as translators, so that they could speak Spanish when it comes specific to healthcare issues, because it's a whole different Spanish and it's a whole different language. So even though you may have an individual in your family that can translate, it doesn't mean that what's being translated is being translated correctly, right? Literacy, health
Mhm.
literacy is a huge deal, even for those
Mhm.
places that have English speaking support.
Yeah. Something that I see, for example, I visit the Dominican Republic very often. Actually, my family is from there. I was born in Puerto Rico, but my family is from the Dominican Republic. And interestingly, when you go to a pharmacy in the Dominican Republic, most of the medications are from Europe, and the labels are in Spanish, so people can read what those say. And like Moraima was mentioning, nowadays, elderly in Puerto Rico have more education, so in Puerto Rico, you are in constant, you are always using English, like maybe not like to speak all the time, like because the actual language is Spanish, but like everything else is in English. So just like Moraima was saying, it's important for people to understand what's being told to them. So I don't really think, as I agree with her, I don't really think that language in Puerto Rico is so much of a barrier as to understand that. However, because not everybody will understand English. Not everybody will be able to take the label of the medication, read that, and understand like this is how you're supposed to be taking that medication. If this happens, do X, Y, and Z. So people in Puerto Rico will rely a lot on what their doctor tells them in terms of, for example, this is how you're going to take your medication, which I believe it's also very important and can become a barrier, just like you were mentioning right now. I wanted to ask here, I have a couple of questions just like to help drive the conversation. What I'm specifically for you, yes, language might not be such a great barrier in Puerto Rico, but what other barrier have you identified that might be something that is the same, for that population who also migrates and comes here to the United States?
I think when we work with our population here, we're seeing we go to the term health equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you want everyone to have the best care available so they can have the best life. But there's a root on that, which is social determinants of health. And that's when it gets interesting because those are things that are not directly related to health. I mean, it's not that I have a headache. It's do I have the access to get a medication for the headache?
Mm-hmm.
It's I have diabetes. I might I might end up in an ER setting. I need my diabetes medications. They prescribe me diabetes insulin for me. The insulin needs to be refrigerated. If I have power outrage here and I don't have access to my medications, my medications are not started properly, then they might go bad, and I will end up again in the hospital. So I think we have barriers when it comes to I'm not gonna say, well, I think we have barriers when it comes to other elements that are part of our culture and part of our day-to-day living that we get used to it. Like, for example, you want to go to see a doctor, and here in Puerto Rico, I mean, it's a joke for us, the waiting time. CMS measure us every year, and they ask you, "Are you able to see your physician in 15 minutes or less?" For us, that doesn't happen. And Luis, you will laugh. You can
Yeah.
smile as well because
I know.
you've
I know.
been there. I mean, you might have to wait 6 months for an appointment, and that's access to care. And it's not because the health plan is not providing you. We have a network, and either your Medicare. a Medicare Advantage with your dual or your non-dual, you still have access to the same network. But then you have a doctor's shortage. So if you need to see, let's say, a neurologist, you might get an appointment for 6 months, and you will have to wait. And if it's something urgent, you might end up in an ER, and that will cost 10 times more than it will actually have cost the appointment. And then when you get to see the physician, you're not going to be the only one there. So you're probably going to have to wait a couple hours to see your physician. If you're lucky, you might wait only 1 hour or maybe less. But people are prompt to wait here for like 2 or 3 hours, and they consider it normal. So that's, I think, a barrier for us, our system. I think part of the problem is that we are facing as a community a physician shortage, and that's creating a problem for us, a problem for our population to get access to care.
Yeah. And probably one of the issues also that face Puerto Ricans is that living in an island, when you are told that you have to wait 6 months to see a doctor, there isn't really anything that you can do. You either have to wait 6 months to see a doctor, or somehow you have to take a plane, go to the mainland, and try to find a doctor there. However, the issue with the network adequacy in Puerto Rico is mostly because there are no doctors there. They're like leaving the island, they're moving somewhere else, and people don't really have a lot of other choices. It doesn't mean that I don't see that here. Working with another company when I moved here to the States 4 years ago, now working as a consultant, I have seen that situation, not necessarily with just the Spanish speaking population, just overall in other states where the network is not completely adequate. And something that catches my attention is that that happens a lot when you go to the rural areas. Now, I don't have all of the numbers. I know there's, of course, Spanish, Latino, English, Spanish speaking members living in the rural areas. But for both of you, the question will be, when you look at that, what do you think is the state of network adequacy, both in Puerto Rico with the situation that is happening? And for you, Mark, what do you think is the situation of network adequacy because people live in rural areas versus urban areas? And of course, being the mainland, the areas to cover are a lot broader and wider than what is in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So that very issue is one of the things, right, that kind of leads me back to where I started when I was first started thinking about kind of this subject, which is ultimately initially what we have to remember is that the Spanish speaking population, right, they're Medicare Advantage members just like every other Medicare Advantage member, and they have the same issues in a lot of ways. So when you think about things like access to care in rural America, access to care, those are real issues, and those are issues that are they deal with in the same way. And I think that when it takes a little bit of change in the way that we're thinking of just about networks and how we build networks out, right? Because things like do physicians speak Spanish, their location, those types of things become very important in the building of a network, and they become very important, right, in the way that we're outreaching to those individuals. So again, going back, right, we just as important to me to know about about Luis speaking Spanish is I need to understand that Luis lives in Orlando, that he doesn't live in Alpine, Texas, and understanding that the fact that he speaks Spanish is one factor, but there's also the factor that he is lives in rural America versus in metro Harris County, which would be Houston, or or that he has some other type of issue. So it's one of those things to where it how does it affect it affects the Spanish speaking population the same way that it affects everyone else, right? And so when we really talk about health equity, part of health equity is not only making sure that that this particular group has what they need, but it's about making sure that everyone has what they need, and that some of those issues that are crossing demographic groups, that we're addressing them and then going back and then looking at individual groups as a second step versus looking at individual groups primarily.
I think you make a great point there, and I think I will add just as you were saying, there are other issues. Like I will take like the economic factor here in Puerto Rico. Around 37, well, of the national sorry, here in Puerto Rico we have a lot of people like are below the poverty level. We got like the median income for a Medicare beneficiary, like Social Security income, which is what they normally get. It's like 14K a year. So with that, you don't qualify for Medicaid. You're just a regular Medicare Advantage beneficiary, and you have to pay for water, electricity. You have a mortgage probably. You have a car. You have to pay gas. You have to buy food. And then that creates an issue itself because you need to buy your medications too. You need to
Mhm.
cover your co-payments. And even though we've been working with our population to lower our co-payments to certain medications, you don't pay co-payments when you see your doctors. So in order for them to bring them access, those are still issues here. I mean, as a company, we've been working to see how we can fix them or how can we work with our members to provide them some extra help in other areas so they can use that money towards healthcare and then try to work with that barrier a little bit better and have them better access to care and not having an issue. I think other issue here is transportation. If you Puerto Rico is an island that only you have public transportation if you live in San Juan. If you live outside San Juan and the metropolitan area of the island, there's no public transportation that's really reliable. So you need a car or you need someone to drive you. Then if you have a doctor's appointment and you can drive, how are you going to make that appointment? So we've been trying to work with that and provide our members with assistance so someone can drive them to the doctor's appointment. And that's been helping a little bit, but that's just one step towards closing those gaps. But like Mark said, it's not only for our Medicaid population or our low income population, it's for everybody in the island. Because at some point there are factors that affect everyone here, not just the Medicare, Medicaid population. So I think that's something that we were looking on, and I agree with what Marcus was saying.
Well, and
Mhm.
I just I don't know how much time we want to, but it's one of the interesting things is everything that Moraima talked about too, right? Is some of those things affect you as a Medicare Advantage member, but some of those just affect you just because you're a human being living in Puerto Rico, and it's the
Mhm.
same for here in the U.S. So one of the things that we've been doing quite a bit, and I think that would be helpful, right, is understanding the journey, right? Your journey does not the journey into Medicare Advantage does not start when someone signs up for a Medicare Advantage plan. And people come into Medicare Advantage in different ways, right? And so depending on where you're coming from as well, meaning understanding my journey in, one of the things in the U.S. that we know is that Latinos, just as in general, receive less healthcare services than the total U.S. population.
Mhm.
They have lower access to care, right? For a lot of kind of the same issues that what Ima talked about that exist that exist in Puerto Rico. So we have to know that this population or these members of this population, when they come into Medicare Advantage, right, they may not have they may not have had the same experience coming in. So we're meeting them at kind of at a different place. The difference between dual eligibles, right, within the Latino population and those folks that are just that are eligible for Medicare only, is different as well. It's important to understand kind of everything that's going on with that individual, besides just kind of that they speak Spanish or just kind of understanding their journey into Medicare Advantage. That way, when they do come to the plan, that we have a good idea of kind of where they're at and where they're going. So a lot of analysis can be done just on how people are getting there. And so kind of those early on communications when someone signs up or when someone enrolls in a plan, understanding
Mhm.
what kind of commercial population they came from. Those are all very important things to understand so that we can better meet their needs.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, of course, being a Spanish speaker and being interested in this topic, like I said, it's thinking about stars. I have numbers from the Kaiser Family Foundation for 2021. If you take all of the states, the United States, and I'm including Puerto Rico for the sake of this comment that I'm going to make, um, for the Medicare Advantage population, California has 22% of their Medicare Advantage population. It's people who identify as Hispanic. Texas has 16% of that Medicare Advantage population identifying as Hispanic. Puerto Rico is in third with 13%. Then you have Florida in fourth place with 12%. And New York comes in fifth place with 7%. So what I'm trying to say with this is I believe this is important, just like both of you were saying. We need to understand what is the journey of this population. We need to understand what are their needs. We need to understand if it's truly more difficult for this population to have access to care. Because if that is true, for whatever reason, it is going to affect your stars eventually. If people cannot have adequate access to care, if people cannot get to go to see that doctor and close those gaps for whatever reason that we can spend hours and hours talking about that, it is going to affect your stars. And for people who are listening to this and they say, well, he did not mention my state. Well, you have Arizona, New Jersey, Illinois, New Mexico, so forth, going down, which are less than 5%. But when you look at the numbers, the Hispanic, Latinos, Spanish-speaking population is expected to grow exponentially between now and 2060. So it is something that we have, to look towards. Yes, there are other populations that are going to probably keep growing in the United States, either because of migration of the people who are just becoming elderly here. But the Spanish-speaking / Hispanic / Latino population is probably the biggest group right now that we see that is not white or black people, that is not native North Americans, right? So again, I believe this is something very important for us to be looking at.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of wrenches in what you said as well, right? Just to make the point that you're trying to make. One is the population is growing, the population is diverse, but then when you look at the population, the immigrant population, when you look at at Spanish speakers in the U.S., the immigrant population is actually healthier than the population that was born in the United States. When you look at Spanish speaking, which we have discovered is that so one of the most important things to understand whether this Spanish speaking person is going to have some huge gaps or less gaps and to kind of understand risk with them is to also understand at what point did they immigrate to the U.S., right? And so if you immigrated when you were 50 and you're a Medicare Advantage member and you're a Spanish speaking individual and you immigrated when you were 10, there's a very different, you have a very different health profile. One is, obesity is higher amongst U.S. born Spanish speaking. So there's all kinds of things, right, that to included in that we can add as far as just, empirical data that says, one, it's growing population, it's a diverse population, and there's so many factors, right, that we need to understand, and it's one of those things that it's hugely important because it's going to be a big piece of the Medicare Advantage pie, going forward.
I think that this administration, I'm sorry, Liz,
No,
I think this administration has made it very clear for them health equity is a priority. We're seeing in stars, it's coming. They're talking about the health equity index. They're talking about new measures that are not going to measure only if you need a special needs. They're going to measure how you manage those special needs. It's not just anymore like I make you an HRA and you answer this, answer that. Now this person has housing issues. What are you doing with that? Are you providing care to that? Because if you don't have an appropriate place to live, then probably you're going to get sick more often than if you do. And the same way, like I was mentioning earlier, if you have to use the money for your house, you don't use it for your healthcare, then you're going to be sicker more often too. So it's about finding the balance where you can help and what you can do as an organization. Here it's really challenging when it talks about poverty because we have a higher population that's under poverty levels, right? But then we got the ones that are in the middle, like I like to call them, because they're not eligible for Medicaid because they make more money than Medicaid allows them, but they don't make that much money. And it's a threshold, right? Because you have to draw a line. Once you pass that line, how do you end up paying for your health care? And that's where you need to meet those people to close the gaps. That's when the doctor's outreach is so important to get to them. That's how us as a health plan design a product that can help you as well, that can empower you with your health and can allow you to get health care to make you feel better. right? And the reward is stars ratings. Of course, it's the reward that we see, but you have to look at it as the person and how you put the person in the middle. The beneficiary, it's in the middle and the center of everything, and how you treat every aspect of his life and how you help them to cope with their life in order to make them more healthy. I'm not sure if that makes
Completely. And I think to to add to that, I found something very interesting also from the Kaiser Family Foundation, and it says that once you hit 65, people who identify as Hispanic, Spanish speaking population in general, on average, I'm sorry, they live longer than whites and blacks. So that means we are here to stay. So that means you have to start paying attention to what is happening to this population. Because again, going back to as a health plan, as a STARS leader, you are likely to have people who are Spanish speakers or Hispanics or Latino longer enroll in your plan. So if we cannot start addressing these barriers to care that they have, they're going to be giving you trouble for a longer than all the other populations.
That's right.
Okay. This has been a great conversation for sure. I wanted to ask maybe one or two more questions. What do you guys think? And probably Mark, this is more of a question for you. How do you think that social assimilation has helped health plans improve the health outcomes of their members? And social assimilation, I mean, for example, like people who come from other countries
Right.
come here, they learn the language, they learn the customs, they start living the American way, to say that you that have been working with different health plans, different states, different Latinos, Hispanic, Spanish speaking populations, do you believe that this sort of a social assimilation has actually helped improve health outcomes, or no?
No, I mean, obviously it has. So if you just look, I don't want to dive too deep into this, right? But it's just like if you just look at and I don't want to give away my age, but I mean, society it has changed quite a bit when we look at just messaging, and we look at I now can watch the Houston Astros, and I can watch it in English, or I can watch it in Spanish on Telemundo, right? So and which was pretty exciting for me. But so society, just as a in general, right? I think one of the things that we've done that's really good, and that I'm really proud of, is that we've recognized that this group of individuals, that this population is growing, and they're a hugely important part of the American fabric. And so we're starting to reach out, and to do things, right, to welcome, and to help assimilate, and greet. That goes. We did a program for a large carrier, and one of the programs that we did was a Medicare Advantage gap in care program, and we used specific types of communication in Spanish, and it was delivered by females in this part, and it was delivered in Spanish, and it was a breast cancer screening, right, for a Hispanic population. And what we found is that when someone is speaking to you in a language that is native to you, or that is comfortable to you, whether you can speak English or not, right, you receive the message differently. When
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking to you about an issue that affects females, and it's coming from a female, it has a different impact on you. It has a greater impact on you. So we have found, I mean, in our work, in what we do, and I've just found in society, and just kind of in our partners as well, is that those places where providers, payers, whoever it is that's delivering the message, where they're just taking into account, right, that this is an individual that has these specific characteristics, and these specific likes or dislikes, or nationality, and there's a million things that we can look at, right, where people are just taking that into consideration, right? They're boosting their outcomes, 2, 3 times. We see 30% higher outcomes whenever we're speaking to a Spanish speaker in Spanish. So I, I, I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. I'm super happy, with a lot of the things that Moraima, talked about kind of the direction that we see a CMS going, and some of the things that are being addressed. And I think it's incredibly important. And I think that we're seeing greater outcomes because of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer. Moraima, one last question for you. What do you think needs to happen um, for the Spanish speaking population in Puerto Rico specifically? What needs to improve in order for the health outcomes of that population to improve?
Wow, that's that's a real question. I guess one thing that one thing that I will say is that we're providing access, but there's also and it's not equitable as a states, right? There's a lack of funding because we're not a state, so that's an issue that we have to tackle, and the Congress has to tackle itself. You know, we've been very vocal about it. What can we do if we get an equal treatment that we get in the states, then we'll be able to get a better system in place, and probably more providers will like to stay in the island because rates will be better. So I think that's a barrier there, that it's improving, that health plans are finding to work around, because the problem has been increasing towards the year. But if you look at the market, our star ratings keep improving because we're working towards it. I mean, Puerto Ricans are really resilient, so we work towards them. I think we need to start looking at the social determinants of health more closely. I think that's something that's kind of new for us here, that we've been began tackling like 4 years ago. Now you said there's a need for transportation and people understand it. 4 years ago was like, what? Why are you even mention transportation and a benefit? Now it's people have it as it's part of their benefits. It has to be. So it's understanding what the characteristics are surrounding our beneficiaries, and how we can keep working towards them to help them have better outcomes. Not just focusing on the woman got the breast cancer screening that she needed to get. Did she got to the appointment? Yes, no. I think there are more important issues, and I think it's towards that line that we're working as a community. I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of where I work, but I see the work in the island. I think all the health industry in Puerto Rico, it's moving towards that, to see how we can give more equitable access to our members that live here, that have worked their whole life, and they just want to being treated equally.
Appreciate that. Mark, and the same question for you. What do you think, one or two things, what do you think needs to happen for us to be able to improve the health outcomes of the Spanish speaking population here in the United States?
I think one of the things that we struggle with, right, is just the amount of of communication. Meaning, is that I think there's no real silver bullet. And if anyone comes and says, "Hey, I've got a silver bullet, and this one thing will change," it's there. There are 100 things that need to be done, but I think probably the most important thing that needs to be done is that we need to have this discussion, right? We need to have this discussion, and we have to really understand, and we have to understand the population, and we have to have a desire to improve the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
and then start making sure that these conversations are being had at all levels and all along that journey, right? Sure,
Mm-hmm.
the physicians play an important part, clinicians play an important part, health plan design folks play an important part. Those guys, those individuals that are in charge of communication and so forth. But the most important thing, I think, is that we need to continue this discussion, and we need to keep it at the forefront, right, of the things that we discuss, and not just for the Spanish-speaking population, right?
Mm-hmm.
For all of those individuals, and to bring and to just focus on health equity at large versus just versus specific populations. But I think this is probably one of the greatest things that we could be doing is just having this discussion.
Starting that conversation. Really appreciate that. Mark, really quick, where can people reach you out if they want to talk to you about the services that you provide?
Right. So www.carenthealthcare.com. But I I'm on LinkedIn as well. So I can my contact information is there. However, we welcome a conversation at any time.
Sounds wonderful. Moraima, how about you? Where can people reach out to you if they want to talk to you about stars or they want to learn more about MCS?
Well, obviously, yeah, we have a lot of service centers around the island. So any members, they can just go and reach us directly to our service centers. They can always call us or customer service, and we got our own webpage, which is mcsclassiccare.com. So that would be great too. I mean, we're just there to we just want to help and we want to empower people.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, great conversation today. Just like you mentioned, the important thing was for us to start having that conversation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more, but I hope that we have been able to spark the interest of the audience and that we can continue having these discussions in the future. So, that being said, thank you so much to both of you, Mark and Moraima. Thank you so much to the audience for watching. We hope to see you soon. So, thank you so much and see you next time.
Thank you, Luis. Pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you. My pleasure.